I remember that I walked outside the house, and I looked, and there came Billy driving by the street. And I watched Billy look out the window at me, and I knew he wanted to stop. And I can think back now, and I know that the powers of darkness, the enemy, just sent him on to where I couldn't tell Billy what had happened to me. It wasn't but a few days later that Billy, who was an alcoholic, was arrested and drowned in his own vomit in a jail cell. The pressures and everything that would come, and just in my own home life, I'd get around my father, my knees would actually knock. Everyone in town was afraid of him. I would tremble, even to walk in the room where he was at times. The pressures on me became so great that when I was about 15 years old, I just left home. I just had to get away from it. I left home, and I missed my mother, and I really missed my dad too. And 15-year-old boy, just couldn't do too much. But finally, I came back, and they met me, and my family did, and got me to take me out of town and hide me from my father for a period of 4 months because he was going to kill me. And during this time that there was supposedly a reconciliation made with my father that I could come back. I could come back home, and I recall that I was so afraid and that my knees knocked as I came back there to face my dad. They walked in the house, and I walked around the house, and as I came to the kitchen, I heard my dad tell my mother and my brother that he was going to kill me. And it was a day or two later that the pressures were so great that I walked out in my yard. And I got down on my knees, and I had such a problem talking to the Lord because every time I'd think of Jesus or try to think of Jesus, curse words would come into my mind. And I was so often used to, no one ever knew this, I would just take my hair and pull my hair and everything, and I'd go running and everything because I couldn't think about Jesus. Every time I'd think curse words, and I thought that was me. I always thought that was me. But anyway, I said, God, I just can't stand anymore. God, please make him die. Please make my father die. It was less than a week that my father had a heart attack and died. And I can't tell you how consumed I became in guilt and condemnation. And they buried my dad, and I would go secretly. I would go to the graveyard, and there the powers of darkness had me. And there they were just building on that already, that brokenness, and just to tear, to steal, to kill, to tear down. I sit there and I would weep over my dad's grave. Why couldn't I ever know you? I've had dreams throughout even my 40 years of dream after dream how I'd do something that would please my father. And that I never really got to know him. I never really got to understand the man. I never knew him. I didn't even know myself. I was in bondage. I was a prisoner. And then this guilt and condemnation followed me everywhere I went. When I was 17, I couldn't function in school. I might as well leave. I could get in the service when I was 17 years old, and I left to join the Air Force. And I've just, I came to the Lackland Field in Texas. This was back in the 40s. And I was what you would call, what today they would refer to as very rural or very slow. I mean, it's an amazing thing as I think back that they even let me. I was emotionally stunted. I was a prisoner. But anyway, during this time, as the enemy was just tearing down the tenderness and the tender heart that the grace of God has given me, he was beating and destroying something I didn't understand. Because, see, I went to church as a small boy, and the only thing I remembered is when the deacon wanted to take the pastor down in the basement and fight. And I didn't learn. I didn't even know until I was 43 years old or understood anything. I didn't understand about Jesus. I did not learn one thing. I did not learn one thing. And now, I went into the service. I was there, and as we would have the little training for the guard duty, I know that during this training, that I was in front of a PX, and I simply just stepped from this guard post to go in there and to get a candy bar, a Coke, I don't remember, and I walked out, and later on, it's just such a simple thing, and I shouldn't have done it, but nevertheless, someone did tell on me. And it was, and that evening at night, I remember that these men had me in this room, and they made me believe that they were going to put me in front of a firing squad that night. And I know that the trembling and the fear, and I really believe them. I believe this is my last night. This is it. I mean, I've heard of things like this, and I really didn't know, and they knew I didn't know because they were enjoying what they was watching there. And this went on, and then I would leave the room. They would bring me back in, and they would go through the thing all over again. And finally, late that night, they told me to go on to the barracks. I couldn't believe that they just let me go to my barracks. Here I'm waiting to be killed, trembling in fear. And here they were telling me that I could go back to my barracks. And then I realized that they had just toyed with me. And then the enemy just put the thoughts and the hostility and the hate and the murder to tear and come against, to tear down. That's the only weapons. I didn't know the weapons of Jesus. I was receiving in my mind the weapons of the devil to come against these people who had toyed with me and everything. And he built this hostility up in me. I didn't want to drink. And finally I came to a place where I decided there might be some kind of escape because of the torment I was in. And then, when I started drinking, I did start drinking, and such hostility is in me. It came out, I come back and turning over beds and everything throughout the barracks. It was later on that drinking and driving over in Japan, where I was there at the occupation of Japan, I was just driving along, I was drinking, and then as I get even with a little 5-year-old boy, he just jerks loose from his mother, and then I can hear the sound right now of this vehicle I was driving, hitting and killing a little 5-year-old boy. And there was just no end to it. There was just no end to it. I can't tell you. There's no way to me explain to you the hours and the time that I look at this little 5-year-old boy and look at myself. I literally despise myself and everything about myself. And the enemy just continued to tear down and destroy everything in my life. I come out of the service. I knew terrible things were wrong with me. I thought I had already seen the church. And the world was telling me, and they already had me programmed to hang in there. Hang in there. Keep a stiff upper lip. Hang on, what they're telling you, hang on to pride. Pride. And I was hanging on there. And I was keeping a stiff upper lip. And there was just not much left of me. As the drinking continued, and as I learned about drugs. So a man on the truck stop dropped some in my coffee and then asked me later on how I felt. And boy, I tell you what, that was a new escape. And then that was before this thing was even popular. And there became something else, an escape. I decided as my thoughts in my mind, if I just lived 5 more years, if that's the extent of my life, it beat the torment to live another day or anything like I'd been living before. So I found it in drugs rather than found it in Jesus. And so as my life continued to spiral downward and downward and into the pits of darkness, I came to a place I wanted to kill myself. I couldn't live anymore. I didn't want to live. And I remember in the loop in Chicago, I went up to the exits and everything to get up on top of a 60-story building. I was a steel rigger at the time. I liked being a steel rigger because I could move and I could run. My average change of residence was every 6 months. I never stayed in any place from the time I was 17 until I was 43 years, more than an average of 6 months. I always had to keep moving. I had to keep running. I had to keep going. And I remember I got on this building and drugs and all, and I leaned over that I'm going to go off of this building. And I leaned way over, and just one thought, and I can go ahead and jump. Just one thought, come on. If that thought had come on, I'll end all this right now. As I leaned over this, but now I think back, I could not. All I could do is just lean over, and just that little push, just that little help to where I could go on, I couldn't get it. So finally I decided, I'll just run around the coping of this building, and I'll just stumble, and I'll fall off of it, and trip. And I did run around, and I didn't stumble, and I didn't, obviously, fall off the building. And I left, and I would go to bridges, different times, always alone.